Hey everyone, this is Sir Balo, and for this video, we're going to discuss about the domain layer in the clean architecture. Now, specifically, ano ba yung i-discuss natin for this video? First, we're going to talk about the domain layer's role. Although we already did mention that in the previous video, but we're going to discuss this in with additional details. No? Next is about the objects within this layer. No? Kasi yung domain layer is also composed of different objects that are interacting. But although iba-iba sila ng role, yung generally same lang sila na they are working together for a specific purpose, which is business logic. And then how to implement this in Flutter. Although we're not going to demonstrate, I'm not going to demonstrate this live, no. But I'm going to share some source codes para makita nyo how will these domain layer objects will look like, no, sa code. So yun. Okay, so basically domain layer just focuses on the business logic and the rules of the application. Okay, when we say business logic and rules, so anything that's related to CRUD, create, rent, update, delete. If there's any validation, i-check natin if this certain, for example, sa e-commerce, we check if pwede pa ba yung order for purchasing, baka out of stock na siya, or is the person that's ordering is doesn't have a discount, and so anything that's business rules, no? It's gonna be implemented sa domain layer. And also, the domain layer is also concerned with what the application does. And take note, it's not how, but what. No? Kasi yung how will be implemented in the different layer, which is yung data access layer. Now, here's the objects that I've been telling you kanina. No? What are those specific objects that are within the domain layer? So we have the following. First, the use cases or the interactors, and then the entities. Think of entities as like a package na pinagsapasa siya between the different objects, no? And the third one is the repository. So the use case will pass an entity to the repository, and also pwede din the repository will also return an entity to the use case. And of course, the use case will pass this entity to the layer na sa itaas niya, which is yung presentation layer. So, yun. Now, let's dive into the specific objects. First is the use case or interactors, no? Another term for use case. Basically, it just defines the specific actions that can be performed sa application. Now, here's an example. No? Let's say, for example, we have an expense tracker na application, mobile app. No? And of course, when we say expense tracker, it's an application for listing all the expenses that you incurred. No? Yesterday, today, few days ago, something like that. Now, ano ba yung mga capabilities or features ng application na to, di ba? If we're going to list it down, ito lang naman yung mga possible actions that we can do with this application. First is we can view all expenses. We can add an expense. No, in fact, we have here a button, plus button. Pag click natin yan, it will prompt the user that, hey, what expense are you going to add? Then we have delete expense, and then we have edit expense. So, ito example lang naman to, but it could possibly na marami pang features or actions ang pwede natin magawa dito sa expense tracker na app. But yeah, so these four actions or features of this app, these are what we call as use cases. So each of these action or operation, whatever. Those are use cases. Use case 1, use case number 2, use case number 3, and use case number 4. And each of these actions perform something, like obviously view, all sequence, add, delete, and edit. So use cases also orchestrate the flow of data to and from entities and repositories. Now, uh, let's break it down. Itong ano ba ibig sabihin nito, no? For example, we have add expense use case. That let's focus on line 9 and 11 na code. No? Itong call na function. And as you notice, this call method or function is asking for an expense na entity. And the one that will provide this is the presentation layer, by the way. So, but let's focus right here on this arrow. No? So you notice that this expense, no, the object, this is what we call as the entity. Entity that contains the data. No? And this data is passed to the function na add expense, which belongs to the expense na repository. So, yun yung ibig sabihin nito. That orchestrates the flow of data to and from the entities and repositories. So, in other words, the expense, the use case is the one that's like orchestrating or that's redirecting kung saan papunta yung data from the presentation layer, saan niya to ipapasa. In this case, it is going to pass this entity that contains the data to the repository. So, yun. Now, how about another example right here? Search expense use case. Where this time around, when it calls the search expense sa expense repository, this search expense method will return a list of entities that contains the data. And of course, it's going to return that value to the use case, which also return niya to the presentation layer. So, yun. So, in other words, the use case, it can accept data, again, the flow of data, diba? It can accept data from the presentation layer, papasok niya down to the repository layer, and at the same time, it will also accept data from the repository and it's going to deliver it on top sa presentation layer. So, yun. Yun yung role ni use case. And the third one is it will also encapsulate the application's business rules. So, when I say business rules, ano yung mga rules? Ano yung mga do's and don'ts? Or like, for example, sa e-commerce, like, kung may discount, what's gonna happen? How much ba yung discount niya? Anyway, we have an example right here. E-commerce na example. Let's say, process order na use case. So, let's focus right here sa line 7 to 17, call na method. Oh yeah, by the way, it's also possible pala that use cases could also contain other use cases. So, pwede siya makinabang, pwede siya mag-depend on already existing na mga use cases. And also, pwede rin, hindi lang, in this example, hindi lang, but use cases could also contain 2 or more repositories. So, this is just additional info by the way, But, yeah. Anyway, going back dito sa line 7 to 17, we have here the call function, and it calls the calculate total amount use case. And then, before it does, it communicates with the repository, it's also possible that we could also insert some business rules na mga implementation. Like, for example, checking the inventory, kung out of stock na ba or pwede pa ba, available pa ba yung product, applying discounts, and so on and so forth. So, yun yung ibig kong sabihin, that it would also, if you're going to implement the business logic and rules sa application, you can insert it sa use cases. So, yun. Okay, next we have entities, which represents the application's business data. So, we've been, ano ba tong data na paulit-ulit kung pinimension, no? So, ito lang naman, no? This is what a entity object looks like. It just simply defines lang ano ba yung mga specific information or attributes niya. No? We have amount, category, date, description. All of these information are related sa expense na record. And aside from that, we also have a constructor, by the way, if you're a bit confused, no? But yeah, this is a constructor, which is we use to create an object. So yun lang yung ano, yung gamit ni entity. Kumbaga, it's just a package that contains data, and this entity is being passed from the presentation to the use case, to the repository, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And then we have repositories, which is, by the way, interface pa lang to, no? Kasi yung implementation niya is in the data layer. And so, since interface lang naman siya, ito lang naman yung role ni repository. It just defines. Yun lang. It just tells you what, but it doesn't tell you how. We're not defining how do we implement the, I'll just show you the example later. But basically, it's just a list of abstract functions. Yun lang. Kaya nga, it just tells you what. Ano yung mga pwede niyang gawin with this repository. But it doesn't tell you, or we don't define in this repository interface kung how it does it. And then this repository is used by the use case to communicate with the data access layer. Now, ito lang naman yung ibig kong sabihin. When we say abstract functions, no? List of abstract functions. Diba, typically in a function, we, after defining its name, its parameters, and its return value, usually what happens is, sa baba, the function is the specific instructions na kailangan niyang i-execute. But in this example, or rather, yeah, we can see that ano lang, it's just a definition lang of ano yung all the possible operations of this repository. It can add expense, it can get all expense, it can update expense, it can delete, search, and filter. And each operation, each CRUD operation, it defines ano yung kailangan niya na parameter input, and ano yung i-return niya na value for this function or operation. But it doesn't tell us, nor we don't define, or hindi nakadefine yung ano yung mga specific instructions in order to achieve this operation. So those implementation will be implemented sa tawag ito, sa data layer. So yun, I hope that this makes sense. Going back to our definition, repository is the interface. Yun lang, it's just list of abstract functions na mga CRUD related. And yeah. So I guess that would be all for this presentation, and I hope that may natutunan kayo with this video. If there's anything that's not clearly to you or didn't make sense, you just leave a comment in this video down below, and I will answer that hopefully during our face-to-face interaction. And yeah, that's all for this video about domain layer, and in the next video I'm going to show you how do we implement this in Flutter. So yun lang, and goodbye.